Some moments etch themselves into your soul through sheer pain, the kind that makes your chest tight and your vision blur. For Omega, that moment was standing alone in the grand ballroom of Ashenvale Castle, watching the man she loved laugh with another woman, while hundreds of eyes burned into her back like hot coals. The crystal chandeliers above seemed to mock her with their perfect light, as whispers slithered through the crowd like poison. She could feel every stare, every smirk, every pitying glance. This was supposed to be her night. Instead, it became the night she wanted to disappear forever. Omega wasn't born into nobility. Her parents were artisans in the lower districts, skilled with their hands but poor in coin. While other children played, Omega buried herself in books salvaged from market stalls and forgotten libraries. She had a gift that set her apart, a mind that could decode ancient languages like most people read street signs. By 16, she'd mastered Old Lycan, the dead tongue of the kingdom's founders. By 20, she was working in the royal archives, the only commoner trusted with the kingdom's most precious historical documents. It was there, among dust and parchment, that she met Cedric. He was a minor lord's son, charming and attentive, or so she thought. He pursued her with poetry and promises, made her believe that love didn't care about bloodlines. For 2 years, she built her future around him. Then came the invitation to the winter banquet, the social event of the season. Cedric insisted she attend as his guest. She saved for months to afford a dress worthy of the occasion. What she didn't know was that Cedric had already promised his hand to Lady Vivian, a duchess with lands and title. The banquet wasn't an invitation, it was a public humiliation. When Omega arrived, Cedric was already at the high table, with Vivian on his arm, laughing like Omega had never existed. The room fell silent when she entered. Then the whispers began. Poor little archive girl. Did she really think he was serious? How pathetic. Omega stood frozen near the entrance, her carefully chosen dress suddenly feeling like a costume, her presence like a stain on marble. She wanted to run, but her legs wouldn't move. That's when the room's energy shifted, like a sudden wind. The massive oak doors at the far end swung open with a resonant boom. Every head turned. The Beast King had arrived. King Theon was a legend wrapped in rumor and fear. He'd ruled for over 300 years, blessed or cursed with immortality, depending on who you asked. They called him the Beast King because he could shift into a massive wolf, because he'd fought in wars that predated anyone's grandparents, because his presence alone could silence a room of nobles like children caught misbehaving. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with silver-streaked dark hair and eyes that seemed to look straight through pretense into truth. He rarely attended social events. When he did, it was always political, never personal. Tonight, he scanned the ballroom with obvious disinterest, his expression carved from stone. Then his gaze found Omega. For 3 impossible seconds, their eyes locked. She expected indifference or perhaps pity. Instead, she saw something else. Recognition, maybe? Understanding? Before she could process it, he was moving. Not toward the high table where he belonged, toward her. The crowd parted like water before a ship. Whispers escalated into shocked murmurs. Cedric's face went pale. Lady Vivian's fan stopped mid-flutter. The Beast King stopped directly in front of Omega, so close she could smell cedar and winter air on him. Then he did the unthinkable. He pulled out the chair beside her at the lowest table in the room and sat down. Not as a king gracing a subject, as an equal choosing a companion. The ballroom fell into a silence so complete you could hear the candles flickering. He leaned slightly toward her and spoke just loud enough for her to hear. "Do me a favor. Pretend you came here with me." His voice was deep, weathered, but not unkind. She blinked, convinced she'd misheard. "Why?" she managed to whisper. "Because I can't stand watching cruel people enjoy themselves, and because you look like you could use an ally right now." He straightened and raised his voice to a normal conversational tone. "My apologies for arriving late. Court matters ran longer than expected." Omega's mind spun. This couldn't be real. Kings didn't defend archive workers, especially not immortal kings with reputations for being cold and distant. But his presence beside her was solid and real, and the effect was immediate. The whispers changed flavor from mockery to confusion to fascination. A servant appeared with wine. Theon accepted 2 glasses and handed one to Omega with casual grace, as if they had attended a dozen events together. "To unexpected evenings," he said, raising his glass. The toast was for the room to hear. Omega lifted her glass with trembling hands. "To unexpected kindness," she replied, surprising herself with her own voice. They drank, and the ballroom slowly remembered how to breathe. Music started again. Conversations resumed, but now every eye kept darting back to their table. Cedric looked like he'd swallowed glass. Theon turned to her with what might have been the ghost of a smile. "I hope you don't mind, but I'm terrible at small talk. Tell me something actually interesting, like why someone fluent in Old Lycan is sitting at the commoners' table when most nobles can barely read their own language." The question caught her off guard. It was genuine, not performative. So she told him about the archives, about the prophecies she'd been cataloging, about a recent discovery of a text predicting a convergence of old magic and new bloodlines. As she spoke, something shifted in his expression. The stone facade cracked just slightly. He asked questions, real ones, about translation methodology, about historical context, about her theories on magical linguistics. They talked through the first course and into the second. Omega forgot where she was, forgot the eyes watching, forgot Cedric existed. This was the first time in months anyone had asked about her work, not her relationship status or her family standing. When the musicians struck up a waltz, Theon stood and extended his hand. "I should warn you, I haven't danced in about 40 years, but it seems we've given them a show so far. Might as well commit." Omega hesitated. She'd never danced at an event like this, but his hand was steady, and his eyes held a challenge that felt almost playful. She took it. He led her to the floor with surprising grace for someone claiming to be out of practice. As they began to move, she stepped on his foot within the first measure. Instead of annoyance, she heard a low chuckle. "See? I told you I was rusty. Clearly it's contagious." The tension broke. She laughed, actually laughed for the first time that night. He adjusted his grip, steadying her. "Follow my lead. Not the steps, the intention." It worked. They found a rhythm that wasn't technically perfect, but felt natural. As they turned across the floor, she caught glimpses of the room. Cedric standing rigid at his table, Vivian whispering urgently behind her hand, dozens of nobles trying not to stare while absolutely staring. And then Cedric appeared at Theon's shoulder. "Your Majesty, if I might," the presumption in his voice barely masked by courtesy. "This woman that is, we had an understanding. I really should." Theon stopped dancing but didn't release Omega. He turned to Cedric with a look that could freeze water. "An understanding? How interesting, because from where I'm standing, it looks like you brought a date to humiliate someone you claim to care about."
"The understanding I see is that you're a coward who gets his validation from cruelty." Cedric's face went from pale to crimson. "Your Majesty, Save it," Theon interrupted. "The lady is with me now, and unless you want to contest that claim formally, I suggest you return to your table." It wasn't a suggestion. It was a command wrapped in silk. Cedric stumbled back like he'd been shoved. Theon turned back to Omega, and the hardness in his face softened immediately. "Shall we step outside? I think you could use some air that doesn't smell like expensive wine and cheaper cologne." The castle gardens were quiet and cool, lit by floating lanterns that bobbed gently in the night breeze. Omega leaned against a stone railing, her heart still racing. "Thank you doesn't feel like enough," she said finally, "for what you did in there." Theon stood a few feet away, hands clasped behind his back, looking up at the stars. "I didn't do it for gratitude. I did it because I've lived long enough to despise petty cruelty. 300 years, and humans still haven't learned that power doesn't give you the right to diminish others." She studied his profile. He looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with the late hour. "May I ask you something?" she ventured. "Why do they call you the Beast King? Is it just because of the wolf form?" He glanced at her, something unreadable in his expression. "Partly, but mostly because I stopped pretending to be what they wanted me to be about 2 centuries ago. Nobility expects their kings to be charming, political, manipulative. I find all of that exhausting, so I built a reputation for being cold and unapproachable, easier than performing humanity for people who only value it when it benefits them. But you helped me tonight. That seems pretty human." His mouth twitched. "Don't tell anyone. It'll ruin my carefully crafted image." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Theon spoke again. "Immortality is lonely, Omega. Everyone you care about becomes dust. You learn to keep distance because attachment means inevitable loss. But every once in a while, you meet someone who reminds you what it felt like to care. Your work with those prophecies, the way you spoke about them, there's a convergence coming, isn't there? Something that connects old magic to new blood." She nodded slowly. "The texts suggest that within the next decade, someone of ancient line and someone of common birth will need to unite to prevent a fracturing of the realm's magical foundation. Without that union, the protection spells woven into the kingdom's borders will collapse. We'd be vulnerable to things that haven't threatened us in centuries." Theon's expression darkened. "I felt it, the weakening. I thought I was imagining it, growing paranoid in my old age. But if the texts confirm it, we need to find the people the prophecy references, soon." She hesitated. "Your Majesty." "There's something else. The prophecy specifically mentions the eternal sovereign and the keeper of lost words. I think it might be referring to you, and possibly to someone who works with ancient languages." He turned to face her fully. "You think it's about us?" "I think it's possible." She met his gaze. "Which terrifies me, honestly. I'm nobody. You're a king who's seen empires rise and fall. How could I possibly be part of something that important?" Theon stepped closer. "You decoded languages that scholars have failed to crack for generations. You found patterns and prophecies that my court historians missed. You walked into that ballroom tonight knowing you'd face humiliation, but you went anyway because you believed someone's word. That's not nobody, Omega. That's someone with more courage than half the titled nobles in that room." Before she could respond, he pulled a small pendant from his pocket. It was silver, inscribed with runes she recognized as old lycan. "This has been in my family for longer than I've been alive. The inscription says, 'Knowledge is strength, love is power.' I'd like you to have it." "Why?" "Because I'm going to ask you to do something, and I want you to know I'm serious. Have dinner with me tomorrow night. Not as king and subject, as 2 people trying to figure out if an old prophecy is about to upend both our lives." She took the pendant with shaking hands. The metal was warm, as if it had been waiting for her. "All right, tomorrow night." He smiled then, a real smile that transformed his entire face. "Good. Fair warning, I'm going to ask you about every prophecy you've ever translated. It's going to be the nerdiest dinner you've ever had." "I'm an archivist," she said, surprised by her own boldness. "Nerdy dinners are kind of my specialty." The next 3 weeks moved like a dream, teetering on the edge of reality. Theon kept his word. Dinners became regular occurrences, always with a chaperone present, because propriety still mattered, even for a king who claimed not to care about appearances. But those dinners revealed layers Omega never expected. Theon wasn't just immortal and powerful, he was funny in a dry, unexpected way. He remembered details she'd mentioned in passing. He asked about her parents and genuinely listened when she talked about her mother's weaving or her father's woodwork. He shared stories from centuries past, not as lessons, but as memories he wanted someone to hold with him. They spent hours in the archives together, poring over prophecies and historical texts. Theon's knowledge of ancient events, combined with Omega's translation skills, created insights that neither could have reached alone. The convergence wasn't just coming, it was already beginning. Minor earthquakes in the northern provinces, reports of creatures crossing borders that should have been magically sealed, a slow unraveling that would accelerate if left unchecked. But the court noticed, and the court talked. Lady Seraphina, the king's chief advisor and a political snake of the highest order, made her disapproval known at every opportunity. Your Majesty, this association is unseemly. The girl is common-born. The nobles are questioning your judgment. Let them question, Theon responded coolly during one particularly tense council meeting. My judgment has kept this kingdom stable for 3 centuries. I think I've earned the right to choose my own company. But it's more than company, isn't it? Seraphina pressed. You're courting her. A king needs an alliance marriage, not a romantic indulgence with an archivist. Theon's eyes went cold. This meeting is over. Everyone out, except Omega. She'd been in the corner, reviewing documents. Now she found herself alone with a king who looked ready to break furniture. I'm sorry, she said quietly. I'm causing problems for you. You're not causing anything. They are. He ran a hand through his hair in frustration. They think power comes from titles and land. They don't understand that real power comes from knowledge, integrity, competence, things you have in abundance, things most of them will never possess. He crossed to her. I need to tell you something. The prophecy, the convergence, all of it. It's real. And it's us. I've known since that first night. The moment I saw you in that ballroom, something in my blood recognized you, like a lock finding its key after centuries of searching. She felt her breath catch. Theon, I'm immortal, Omega. You're not. That's a complication I can't ignore. Whatever this is between us, you need to understand what you'd be choosing. I age, you don't. I have decades at most. You have eternity. How does that work? I don't know. He said it so honestly it hurt. But I know that for the first time in 200 years, I feel like I'm living instead of just existing. And I know that when I think about facing the next century, the only way it doesn't feel unbearable is if you're in it. I'm terrified. Good. So am I. Terrified means it matters. She looked down at the pendant she now wore every day. Knowledge is strength. Love is power. What if we're wrong about the prophecy? Then we're wrong. But I'd rather be wrong together than right and alone. She made her choice in that moment. Let's find out together. Let's figure out this convergence, this prophecy, this impossible thing we're becoming. And whatever happens, we do it as partners. He kissed her then, gentle and certain all at once, and the world felt like it shifted into place. But the world rarely lets love exist without testing it. 2 weeks later, a border crisis erupted. The northern province of Steelmark reported massive breaches in the magical wards. Creatures of old magic, things that shouldn't exist anymore, were crossing into farmlands. 3 villages had been evacuated. The council demanded military action. Theon knew better.
This isn't an invasion, it's a symptom. The convergence is accelerating. We need a permanent solution, not a temporary military bandage. What do you suggest? Elder Moira, one of the few council members Theon trusted, asked carefully. Omega stepped forward before she could second-guess herself. I think I know. There's a treaty, ancient, from before the kingdom unified. It was designed to bind old magic and new governance together, creating a permanent ward structure. But it required something specific, a union of ancient blood and new wisdom, a literal marriage compact. The room erupted. Absurd, Seraphina snapped. We can't base national defense on a romantic fairy tale. It's not a fairy tale, Omega shot back, her voice stronger than she felt. It's documented in 6 separate historical sources, corroborated by runework analysis. The treaty was abandoned because the royal line at the time didn't believe in sharing power with common-born citizens, but the magical framework is still there. Dormant, waiting for the right catalyst. And you think you're that catalyst? Seraphina's tone dripped contempt. I think the evidence points to it, but I'm open to alternative explanations if you have historical documentation that contradicts mine.
Serafina had no response. Seon stood. The treaty Omega references is real. I've seen fragments of it myself, but never understood the full context. If she's right, and I believe she is, then we have a choice. We can send soldiers to fight symptoms while our borders crumble, or we can address the root cause. Which is what, exactly? One of the younger council members asked. Elder Magnus, the kingdom's senior magical scholar, spoke up from the back of the room. He'd been silent until now. If I may, I took the liberty of examining the texts Miss Omega provided, cross-referenced them with our oldest magical records. The convergence she's identified is legitimate. The treaty structure is viable, and the individuals it requires are specific.
Ancient sovereign blood bound to the keeper of lost knowledge through formal union. He looked directly at Theon and Omega. It's them, the two of you. There's no ambiguity. This is either the solution, or we face border collapse within 6 months. The silence that followed was deafening. Theon made his decision in that moment. Then we move forward. I will invoke the ancient treaty, and I will formally ask Omega to marry me, not as a political arrangement, but as a choice we both make freely. The convergence requires willing union, not coerced partnership. Omega felt the weight of every eye in the room. This was insane. She was an archivist from the lower districts. 3 months ago, she'd been crying at a banquet. Now she was being asked to marry an immortal king to save the kingdom? But when she looked at Theon, she didn't see a king or a legend or a 300-year-old immortal. She saw a man who'd chosen to sit beside her when she needed an ally.
Who'd spent weeks listening to her theories and valuing her mind. Who looked at her like she was the answer to a question he'd been asking for centuries. "I need to say something," she announced, her voice cutting through the murmurs. "Everyone here thinks I'm going to fail, that I'm not good enough for this role, for this treaty, for this kingdom. You might be right. I don't have training in statecraft or military strategy or political maneuvering, but I have spent my entire life learning to find truth in forgotten places. I can read the languages your ancestors buried because they were inconvenient. I can solve puzzles that have stumped your best scholars. And I can stand here in this room full of people who think I'm beneath them and tell you that I'm willing to try. Because the alternative is watching people die because of pride and tradition. So yes, I'll do it. Not because I think I'm worthy, but because I'm the person the magic chose." And sometimes you have to trust that there's a reason for things you don't understand yet. Elder Moira started clapping, then Elder Magnus joined. Within moments, half the council was applauding. Serafina looked like she'd bitten into spoiled fruit. Theon crossed to Omega and took her hand. "That," he said quietly, "just for her, is why it's you." The formal proposal came 3 days later in the same gardens where they'd first truly talked. Theon knelt, which felt absurd for a king, but he insisted. "Omega," he began, and she could hear the nervousness under his steady tone. "I've lived through ages, seen empires crumble and rebuild, watched the world change in ways I never imagined possible, and in all that time I've never felt like I found the thing I was waiting for. Until you. This isn't about prophecy or treaties or saving the kingdom, though we'll do that too. This is about choosing you. Because when I imagine the centuries ahead, the only version that doesn't feel empty is the one where you're beside me. I don't know how we'll navigate the immortality difference. I don't know if the magic can equalize our lifespans, or if we'll have to face the pain of your mortality while I continue. But I know I want to try. I want to build libraries with you and argue about translation methodologies and listen to you explain things I should already know but somehow never learned. I want to wake up in 200 years and still be discovering new things about you. So I'm asking, will you marry me? Not as king to subject, not as treaty requirement, but as the man who loves you to the woman who changed everything." She pulled him to his feet because watching a king kneel felt wrong on every level. "Yes," she said simply, "to all of it. The uncertainty, the prophecy, the impossible partnership. Yes,
He slid a ring onto her finger. It was silver, with a single stone that seemed to hold starlight. It had been his mother's, he told her. The only thing he'd kept from his mortal life before the immortality took hold. They married a week later, under the open sky in the castle gardens. No grand cathedral ceremony, no political pageantry, just a simple exchange of vows with close friends and family present. Omega wore a dress her mother had woven with threads of silver and blue. Theon wore the formal regalia of his office, but removed the crown before they spoke their vows. In this moment, he said, I'm just a man marrying the woman he loves. The treaty magic activated the moment they completed their vows. Every magical scholar in the kingdom reported feeling it, a surge of power that rippled outward from the capital like rings in water. The border ward strengthened, the fractures sealed. The creatures that had been crossing through retreated back to their own realms. The convergence stabilized. Elder Magnus verified it within hours. The union worked. The kingdom was secure in a way it hadn't been in decades.
Not because of military might or political maneuvering, because two people chose each other. Their life together began in a way neither expected. Omega refused to abandon her work in the archives, so Theon had an extension built onto the library specifically for her research. They spent mornings reviewing prophecies and historical documents, afternoons in council meetings where Omega's insights proved invaluable, and evenings talking about everything and nothing. She opened the royal library to the public for the first time in the kingdom's history. Knowledge shouldn't be hoarded, she argued, and Theon agreed. Scholars from across the realm came to study texts that had been locked away for generations. The kingdom's magical understanding expanded exponentially. They faced challenges. Seraphina remained a thorn, constantly undermining Omega's suggestions until Theon finally removed her from the council. The immortality question loomed like a shadow they couldn't escape. Some nights, Omega woke up terrified of the day her body would age while his remained unchanged. But Theon found a text, very deep in the archives, suggesting that bonded pairs and treaty unions sometimes experienced lifespan synchronization. It wasn't guaranteed, but it was hope. They held on to that. 6 months into their marriage, during a routine archive session, Omega found something, a small notation in the margins of an ancient text. Her hand started shaking as she translated it. "Theon," she called, her voice strange. "You need to see this." He came immediately, taking in her expression. "What is it?" She pointed to the marginalia. "It's a note from the original treaty author. It says that unions formed under the Convergence Treaty create a magical bond that equalizes lifespans. Not immortality for both, but a shared timeline. We'll age together, whatever that looks like. The magic balances us." Theon read it 3 times, then pulled her into his arms so tightly she could barely breathe. "We get to grow old together," he whispered into her hair. "After 300 years of watching everyone I cared about turn to dust, I get to actually share a life with someone." She felt his tears in her hair and let her own fall freely. They stood there in the archives, surrounded by the books that brought them together, holding on to each other like lifelines. The Beast King and his archivist queen. The ancient sovereign and the keeper of lost words. 2 people who'd been broken and lonely until the night they found each other in a ballroom full of cruelty and chose kindness instead. Years passed. Omega became known as the Scholar Queen, respected across the realm for her wisdom and knowledge. She established schools in every province, ensuring that education wasn't just for nobility. Theon, with Omega beside him, became less beast and more king in the eyes of his people. Not because he changed who he was, but because they finally saw him clearly through her eyes. They had arguments, because real love isn't perfect. They had doubts, because building something unprecedented means questioning everything. But they had each other, and they had the absolute certainty that some things, the important things, are worth fighting for. On their 10th anniversary, Theon took Omega back to the gardens where he'd proposed.
I have something for you, he said, producing a leather-bound book. She opened it carefully. Inside were pages he'd written himself, documenting their story. The ballroom, the gardens, the prophecy, the treaty. Every moment that led them here. So we don't forget, he explained, so that centuries from now, when we're old and gray together, we can remember the night an archivist and a king decided to rewrite the rules. She traced the words with gentle fingers, then looked up at him with eyes full of everything they'd built. We did pretty well, didn't we, for two people who had no idea what we were doing? We did, he agreed. We really did.
And somewhere in the castle archives, filed among prophecies and ancient texts, a final notation appeared in Omega's handwriting, written in old lycan so only those who truly studied would understand it. It said, "The worst night of your life might be the doorway to everything you never knew you needed. Sometimes salvation wears a crown and sits beside you when everyone else walks away. This is how magic really works, not in spells or treaties, but in the choice to see someone, truly see them, and decide they matter." If this story reminded you that kindness can change everything, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss our next tale. Drop a comment with the word moon if you believe in second chances and unexpected love stories. And if you know someone who needs to hear that their worst moment might lead to their best chapter, share this video with them. Sometimes we all need to remember that the right person will sit beside us when the world walks away. Thanks for watching, and remember, your story isn't over yet.